Being taken for granted doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. One day you're appreciated, needed, and valued. And before you realize it, your effort becomes expected, your presence becomes assumed, and your sacrifices become invisible. What makes this experience so painful isn't just the lack of appreciation, it's the confusion. You start asking yourself questions you never had to ask before. When did this change? What did I do wrong? How did giving more somehow lead to receiving less? Psychologically, being taken for granted cuts deeper than rejection. Rejection is clear. It has an ending. But being taken for granted traps you in uncertainty. You're still there, still needed, still useful, yet somehow no longer respected in the same way. And that uncertainty keeps you giving, hoping, and overextending long after you should have stopped. The uncomfortable truth is this: people don't take advantage of kindness by accident. They learn what you will tolerate. They learn how much access they have to your time, energy, and emotional labor. And once that pattern is set, it becomes the new normal. This video isn't about blaming yourself. It's about understanding the psychology behind why good intentions often lead to quiet exploitation, and why the people who give the most are often the ones valued the least. By the end, you'll see this pattern clearly. And once you see it, you can never unsee it again. At the core of being taken for granted is a simple psychological principle. Familiarity reduces perceived value. When something is always available, the mind stops registering it as special. This applies not only to objects, but to people. When you are consistently present, reliable, and forgiving, your effort blends into the background of someone else's life. The brain adapts quickly. What once felt meaningful becomes expected. What once felt generous becomes normal. And eventually, what was once appreciated becomes overlooked entirely. This is not always driven by malice. Often it is driven by conditioning. People unconsciously learn that your support will exist whether they acknowledge it or not. This is why overgiving is dangerous. The more you compensate for others, the less they feel the weight of their own responsibility. You fill gaps that were never meant to be yours, and in doing so, you remove the opportunity for others to value your contribution. Effort that comes without cost is rarely respected. Over time, this creates an imbalance. You begin operating from obligation while the other person operates from comfort. And psychologically, comfort dulls gratitude. When people no longer fear losing something, they stop protecting it. Being taken for granted is not about being too kind. It's about being too predictable. And predictability, when combined with emotional availability, often leads to invisibility. Another reason people take others for granted is the absence of boundaries. When boundaries are unclear, the mind assumes permission. Every unspoken yes becomes a silent agreement. Every time you ignore your own limits, you teach others where your breaking point is, and that it can be pushed further. Psychologically, boundaries create contrast. They signal value by introducing limits. Without them, your time and energy appear unlimited, and unlimited resources are rarely respected. This is why people who say no occasionally are often valued more than those who never do. Scarcity sharpens awareness. There is also an emotional trap hidden here. Many people believe that setting boundaries will lead to rejection or abandonment. So instead, they overextend, hoping to secure connection through usefulness. But usefulness does not equal value. When your role becomes transactional, your humanity fades into function. This is when resentment begins. You feel unseen, unheard, and emotionally depleted. Yet you continue giving because pulling back feels risky. Psychologically, this creates a self-reinforcing cycle. The more you give without boundaries, the more invisible you become, and the harder it feels to stop. Being taken for granted is rarely about others crossing your limits. It's about them never seeing those limits in the first place. There is also a subtle power dynamic at play. The person who gives more emotionally often holds less psychological power. When you care more, you invest more. When you invest more, you fear loss more, and that fear quietly shapes your behavior. You tolerate things you shouldn't. You stay silent when something hurts. You accept imbalance to avoid conflict. From a psychological standpoint, power flows toward the person who is least afraid to walk away. This doesn't mean they care less. It means they are less dependent. And dependence, when sensed, changes how people behave. Respect slowly erodes when someone knows you will stay regardless of how they treat you. This is why being taken for granted often follows emotional attachment. The deeper the attachment, the easier it is for imbalance to grow unnoticed. You begin prioritizing harmony over honesty, and in doing so, you trade short-term peace for long-term self-erasure. What's painful is that this dynamic often goes unseen until damage is done. You don't notice it while you're adapting, compromising, and understanding. You notice it when you finally stop and realize how little changes without you. Being taken for granted is not just emotional neglect. It is a shift in power that happens quietly while you're focused on keeping the connection alive. What makes being taken for granted so psychologically damaging is the way it distorts your self-perception. When appreciation disappears, the mind looks inward for explanations. You begin to question your worth, your effort, and your value, not because you've changed, but because the feedback has. The human brain relies on response to calibrate meaning. When effort is met with acknowledgement, it reinforces identity. When effort is met with silence, it creates doubt. Over time, this doubt erodes confidence. You start giving not from abundance, but from insecurity, hoping that more effort will restore what was lost. This is where many people get stuck. They believe that if they just try harder, things will return to how they were. But psychologically, overgiving rarely restores respect. It often confirms the pattern. The more you prove that you'll stay without recognition, the more normalized the imbalance becomes. Eventually, emotional exhaustion sets in. You feel drained, disconnected, and quietly resentful, and yet walking away feels heavy because you've invested so much of yourself. This is the silent cost of being taken for granted, not just the loss of appreciation, but the loss of self. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before your value was measured by how much you could endure. Being taken for granted is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of an imbalance that forms slowly, quietly, and without clear warning. Understanding this psychology doesn't make the pain disappear, but it gives you back clarity. And clarity is where power returns. The truth is, people don't suddenly forget your value. They adapt to your availability. They adjust to your tolerance. They learn what costs them nothing to keep. And when something costs nothing, the mind stops protecting it. So here is the shift that changes everything. Value is not created by giving more. Value is created by knowing when to stop, by allowing absence to speak, by letting effort meet boundaries. When you pull back, not in anger, not in punishment, but in self-respect, you restore contrast, and contrast brings awareness. Here's your quiet assignment. For the next few days, observe where you are overgiving. Notice where your effort goes without response. Choose one place, just one, where you will do less and watch what happens. Not to test anyone, not to manipulate, but to listen. Behavior always tells the truth, and if this perspective felt uncomfortably accurate, it's probably because you're starting to see patterns instead of emotions. Stay curious, stay aware. And if you find yourself returning to ideas like this, ones that don't shout but stay with you long after, then you already know where to be next time.